Ranya.
Yeah, I know. I know. I mean, it's nice having a unique name, but then sometimes people just absolutely
Totally.
butcher it. They totally butcher, and then mine's the worst, and it's one syllable as well.
I
So at
know,
least yours
really.
is two syllables.
Like, how can they get it wrong?
I know.
That was a surprise to me, you know. But like, in a German-speaking country like Austria, it's like Ranya, Ranya. Like, it's a complete confusion.
Yeah. It's nice sometimes to have a unique name, but it does come with a burden.
It does.
It does. How are you?
I'm good. It's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. So what we'll do is I'll do like a little introduction,
Okay.
and then we'll get into it straight away. Planning to do about an hour, if that's okay.
Okay, great.
And we'll go from there. I'll just ask you some questions, like your inspiration behind the book, and then obviously we'll talk about the book.
Yeah.
Some questions I have, just so you can elaborate more on the book, and just because I enjoyed reading it, and as someone who, yeah, we'll get into it a bit more, but as someone who is like a millennial, it's interesting to hear from the other side how people
Totally.
should manage us, because we're apparently hard to manage. So first of all, thank you so much. Everyone, this is Ranya Nehmeh, the author of The Chameleon Leader over here. She is a human resources specialist, international development practitioner, and doctor of business administration. So a lot of good experience. And in The Chameleon Leader, she talks about the importance of leading the millennials in the new age, and the changes in our world and how to lead them best. Thank you very much for coming
Thank
on.
you. Thank you so much.
And yeah, I enjoyed reading The Chameleon Leader, and it's nice to get you here and ask you some questions on it. First of all, what was your inspiration behind writing the book?
Well, to be honest, the thing is, I work in an organization where I work in HR. And in HR, I do everything from recruitment and especially of young talent. And what I realized is over the years, especially the last years, maybe the last 3 to 5 years, is that we have had a completely different kind of caliber of employees coming in, and the way they were thinking and how they were behaving was very different to our current employees. And I'm in the public sector, so it's definitely more old school.
Mm.
So after like a few months of being on board, they were already asking me about when they were going to get promoted and what are their training opportunities. And I love this kind of excitement and passion. But at the same time, it's completely unrealistic in our industry. I think in other industries, maybe it could be more, like maybe more in the private sector or really in the startup world where, when you prove yourself, you can move up and shoot up. But in the public sector, it's really not. So,
Yeah.
and that's really what started to get me thinking, actually, of how different our approaches are. Because, when I was that age and I was entering the workplace, I was really like a soldier, more of a like, do this. Yeah, okay, sure. Because I thought that's how the world worked,
Mm.
at the time. But now it's like it's a very different. It's actually a very different feel. So this set the kind of the foundation for the book. So it really made me very interested in this area. And then as I started the book, actually, on the first page, you will see that I had family over from the States, and I have a couple of cousins who are very, they're very, they talk a lot about, what they think they deserve and the workplace and everything. And actually this conversation with them also started to give me a better idea of what they expect in the workplace. And that's actually where the idea then started to come from. So it really was just started quite by chance. I wasn't intending to write a book, actually, but I started as interest.
Mm.
And then it moved on to, okay, let me just research this and let's see what the results are.
Yeah. Did it end? Did it when you completed it? Did it go as you had expected when you started it?
Actually, I think yes, because after I started to speak to so many people then at that time about their expectations of the workplace and whatnot, and I think the results were quite what I expected in a way.
Yeah.
So, and
From
maybe there was one thing that was a bit unexpected was the communication part, though. That really surprised me because I always thought that, millennials are more focused on, like technological way of communicating, it has
Mm.
to be WhatsApp or an email or something. But actually, when most of them said that no, they prefer in person, I think that was also really like okay, that was a bit of a, light bulb moment. But other than that, I have to say it's pretty much what I expected.
It's interesting because when I read that, and everyone kind of has this idea that millennials, like, we spend all our time on Instagram and checking and
Exactly.
on the DMs and messaging each other. But
Exactly.
then when it comes to the professional environment, like myself, like I have
Yeah.
public sector experience. Like, I worked for
Okay.
the civil service in the UK,
Okay.
and I appreciate face-to-face discussions in that environment more than I do in the
Very.
casual environment. And in the book, you touched upon, like, the idea that, we like to spend 5 minutes, on Instagram in between work, and we
Yeah.
don't know where the boundary is between that. And it's very interesting for me, as the communication aspect when it comes to the professional environment is so important, that
Yeah.
face-to-face discussion, which probably most people don't understand. But when you were writing the book and you were coming to understand these characteristics of millennials
Mhm.
that you didn't know previously,
Yeah.
did you have these ideas about how they should be managed, and how in some circumstances you were seeing people mismanaging them?
I mean, plenty. And I think that was also part of the inspiration for the book, to be honest, is because in the workplace, I noticed there was such a clash between, for example, I wouldn't say from my, like, I am actually what you would consider now exennial. Like, the in between the
Okay.
between the millennials and the Gen X, and
Okay.
one above. But I think, like, the people who are much older, actually, they really they had a whole different way of working, and I saw that in so many small things, things like work-life balance. The older generations, they're more like, no, no, this is our job, we have 9 to 5, this and that, these are the hours. And when and they didn't understand this whole concept of, let's go, really, let's just, it's about the productivity and not about the time that we spend in the office. So this was a completely alien kind of attitude for them. So it's small little things. And especially in the interviews, when we're interviewing them, the panel, for example, was all of the older generations, and they're interviewing them, and they're hearing, no, we want a flexible environment, we want this. And already from that point, you could already see the clash. So obviously then when you recruit them, and if that's how you're thinking, then there is going to be a clash as you go along. So it wasn't small details, actually, but it was very obvious.
Mm. Yeah, I think for us going in, for instance, like with me when I was going to my first job, that flexibility was so important. I
Yeah.
think we now see the ways of working, especially when you go through the university system and all that kind of stuff. Everything's so um, focused on the individual flexibility and the time when it comes to working. So if you go from that structure into the working structure and then it's so rigid, you
Oh,
kind of get
totally.
this, you don't get this feeling that you can show your best self.
Totally.
And I think, if what is the one characteristic that you see from managers that really hampers their ability to get the most out of their millennial workers?
Honestly, I think that one of the things that I see is well, they just don't empower them at all. They feel like this is the hierarchical kind of mentality of, like, I know, I say, this is how things are done around here. So, and I think this is really one of the biggest problems, because in every organization, you need to be able to change as you go along. I mean, if there's no change, an organization cannot survive. So, and we say this all the time, they say this all the time, so why do they say it but then they don't act it?
Mm.
So I see that on a daily basis sometimes, where it's like, small things where you can just empower somebody, and you can just say, you know what, I and not micromanage, and not, just say, this is your task, please deliver it, and then give them constructive feedback, not like, oh my god, this is terrible, they don't know what they're doing, or you
Mm.
know or feel threatened if they do it too well. So it,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
goes
yeah.
it goes
That
both ways,
that's the other side of it, because I've
yeah,
seen that happen. Like,
I'm
I've
sure.
seen in previous jobs, in not to myself but to others. I mean, they've produced like a really good piece of work, and a manager or a colleague feels threatened, and they actively go out their way to, in a way,
Yeah,
sabotage that one individual. And if that person's new, they
yeah,
feel,
totally.
disheartened, and they're completely, just feel disenfranchised from the organization.
Absolutely. And the thing is, the minute that this trust between two people, especially in the workplace, like your employer, employee, between you and your boss, the minute this trust is gone, because you feel like, they're really not supportive of you, I think it's really difficult to regain. And then it's just a matter of time until the whole working relationship and environment kind of goes down. And I think this is what leaders especially like just normal managers, sometimes they just don't understand, like, you don't get 20 chances to do it right. You really have to try to do it right from the beginning, and actually it's just a matter of communicating. Sometimes it's just easy. It's just getting somebody in a room and saying, listen, you did it like this, you did a good job there, but you could do it better. I think that was also the main thing, is that I think a lot of millennials feel that they don't have the voice, that they just don't have a voice because they're not being listened to, and they're not being heard. And I think this is something that also sometimes it just needs a coffee together, to really understand some of the issues that they're facing. So I think
Wh-
that's a small thing sometimes where I think managers just fail.
Yeah, where do you think the balance is between allowing them to speak and the experience factor? Because that is also something that's really important. Is yes, it's obviously great to listen to their feedback, and some people may have great ideas starting off, but at the same time, is if you allow someone maybe too much freedom in the beginning, they don't have the necessary experience, let's say, in a certain environment to maybe offer, really good practical advice. Where is the balance between empowerment at the start and sort of allowing them to kind of go off on a tangent? Because for me, that's really interesting as someone who wants to have the freedom to work, but also understands that I'm new, I'm inexperienced, and I want to learn. Like, where is that balance, like in
I think
practice?
that's a great question, actually. And, I think that at the end of the day, in the workplace, it's all about delivering, right? It's all about delivering a piece of work, or delivering quality, or, finishing a project, or there is some kind of deliverable at the end of it. And I think at the end of the day, you're measured, or you should be measured for that. So I think the balance is to really see how they are working. So you give somebody, you empower somebody, and then you allow them to go and do to go and do that job. But having said that, there's deadlines, there is continuous communication, there's feedback along the way. And if you feel at any step, and it's you can notice then as you go along, if somebody is just in their own little world, and just kind of you know feeling empowered and not producing, or if somebody's really taking it seriously. So I think at the end of the day, it's like your quality and your work speaks for itself.
Mm. Yeah, at the end of the day, that is kind of like the benchmark, and it
Right.
should really be the benchmark, isn't it?
It should be, yeah.
Um, when I was reading the book,
Yeah.
and when you did the survey for Young One World, it's really interesting actually, because when I was reading it, my brother went to the one in
Oh,
last year.
oh,
So he works for
the one in The
BMW.
Hague.
Where? No,
Was it
did
The
he go
Hague?
to The Hague? Or
Oh
did
no,
he
because
go?
2018 was The Hague. That's where I went. That's
Yeah,
where
and
I
where was the one?
was it Munich last year, I think, or no, or London. Maybe it was
No, it's
actually London.
London. I
It was
think it was London.
London.
I think it was
Yeah.
Royal Albert Hall. I think.
Yeah, and I think it was they're celebrating their 10 year or something, because I think they started it in London 10 years ago. So, well, that's great,
Yeah,
really.
so he went to that. So
What did he
when I was reading
say?
the book, oh, he loved it.
Oh yeah.
He was like, it was amazing to be around people who had a vision that was greater than themselves, and were really actively looking to change not only their community but their environment, and the world in general. And when I was reading stories from people, I think it's really important for people to spend time around people like that. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people perhaps spend time around people who are maybe not the best, um, in setting those kind of agendas, and that kind of mindset. When you did you were you the one who were actually asking them these questions, or was this a survey that you did externally and then got the results from?
I actually, this was mainly, it was actually two parts. Some of it was interview questions. So basically, that you saw was, I actually asked them, and I just took notes and whatnot. And the others was just a survey that I sent out. The thing is that, people hate taking surveys. This is the problem. And I noticed that after some time, I used all my contacts, the people that I knew, I used all my channels, and I got maybe, I think it was 300 or something, but it was not enough for it. So that's when I decided to book this flight and go to The Hague, to the One Young World, because I thought, okay, there's thousands of people. I
Mm.
had two friends with me, each one with an iPad, and I was like, this is this is the best way now to get responses. And actually, that's how we got like the other 400, 500, like 300 or 350,
Mm,
because it's and that was the most interesting part, because you get to talk to the people,
mm.
and then some of them go on tangents because they get
Yeah.
very excited about the
Yeah.
topic. Others you can see are like, so been there, done that. This is really
Mm.
boring, you know. But either way, this was the best opportunity to really mix and mingle and to get, you know, these kind of different perspectives.
What was the one
So,
commonality that you found between the people that you interviewed
you
or
know,
surveyed?
honestly, is that they all had something to say.
Okay.
They really all had something to say, and they really, again, this is what's really about, like wanting to be heard.
Mm,
And I felt like a lot of them in the workplace, actually, I didn't feel, they told me that a lot of them in the workplace, they are still seen as, oh, these cute little, you know, they don't know yet
mm,
anything, they don't have the experience yet. And of course I understand this part about experience, because that's so important. But also I don't understand, because you know, when you start to dismiss people, then you're also dismissing like a large part of their confidence, and
yep.
this hampers their ability to develop it as they go along. And that's really, I think, one of the worst things you can do to people who are starting new in the workplace.
I think that
So,
confidence aspect is really
oh,
important.
it's so
I
important, and
think
it's so easy to lose it, and it's so
mm,
easy to actually get it crushed from a very young age, and then rebuilding that is like, good luck.
it's the rebuilding that's really difficult because
Yeah,
not only, like you said, is that trust factor with the manager, but it's also like an internal dialogue that you're facing with yourselves.
totally.
Because when you get a new job, you're kind of like, oh my God, I'm really excited about this new job. And then the first thing you kind of get hit with a lack of confidence. And if
Yeah,
that happens over and over
yeah,
again, it's
yeah,
really difficult.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, and
yeah.
you
So
know, you saw in the book there was one part where and this is a really true story about my first experience when I joined, and my boss was telling me about cutting and pasting, and how she took my report and she whoop, like she
mm,
literally cut it and pasted it, and was trying to explain to me that this is how I should do it, and I couldn't believe it. Like, I had studied, I had, you know, university, and I
mm,
felt so like I could do everything, and then this was what I was faced with. So, you know, it took a long time to to rebuild from that.
yeah, I mean, I had one situation in the previous job where I had someone who actively went out their way to give me misinformation.
Oh, that's just
Which is
wrong.
and it's one of those things. It was a big learning curve for me because I was like, I kind of thought back to myself, I was like, what situations did I
Mhm.
allow that person to do it? And I
Okay.
actually found myself in situations that I was allowing myself the opportunity
Okay.
to get that person to do it. So
Okay.
it was very thoughtful for me in that situation. I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that, maybe I shouldn't do that.
Because you were
uh,
strategizing.
I was strategizing afterwards because I think it's really important because those face-to-face meetings with a manager is really important. It's
Hmm.
something that I found really important because I was on a grad scheme, my first job out of university,
Okay.
and I was on a rotational program. So
Okay.
sometimes you'd have for a year, you'd have one manager, and another time you'd have another
Hmm.
manager every year. And I found the good managers were the ones who, no matter how busy they would take 15, 20 minutes to have a conversation with you face to
Yeah.
face. And the bad ones were the ones that are like, oh, I've got this meeting, I'll have to delay it. Oh, this has
Yeah.
come up, I need to do it.
Yeah.
Um, have you found through your personal experience
Hmm.
as a in the field of HR,
Hmm.
what is the one characteristic for being a good manager in the sense of the emotional intelligence? Because we have in the book you talk about the different aspects to it, you know, the honesty and the
Hmm.
communication. For me, it was the emotional intelligence part of it because you have so many different people in the workplace.
Yeah.
How important is emotional intelligence? And you referenced Daniel Goleman and him in the book, and I love his book, Emotional
Hmm.
Intelligence. How important is it in practice?
Oh, I think honestly, I think emotional intelligence is one of the most important things in practice, actually, if not the most important, because you know, it's all about how you express yourself and how you talk to others and how you show empathy and how you connect with others. And at the end of the day, whether you're in HR or whether you're just a human being, actually, with
Yeah.
any other person, this is the main thing that we have to do. We have to connect with other human beings on whatever level, personal, professional. And I think that the EI part is so much more important than IQ, because you could know everything, but actually it's the delivery. If you don't deliver that in a way that, you know, that shows that you are listening, that you're empathetic, that you have all these qualities, then the message will be lost. So I think that emotional intelligence is by far one of the most important things, and it's so underrated sometimes. You know, I think it's people still, they use it as a catchword. Oh, EI is so important, but I don't think that they really understand that it is really, this connection is it's a make or break, actually, in every situation.
Do you think employers can do more to train managers to actively? Because some people are, I mean, you've probably met people, and I've definitely met people who it's a characteristic, it's a human trait for
Yeah,
them that they have this ability, whereas
yeah.
others it's trained. Do you feel like companies need to do more to actively train managers to manage more effectively in that realm?
Definitely, definitely. I think that is one of the main things that actually for a manager, that's what their main responsibility is, I think as managers, of course, you need to have the technical expertise, but I think the minute that you are managing people, you really need to understand this whole how to manage people.
Mm.
And I think that organizations definitely, actually, the good thing is that I think a lot of them have realized the importance of EI, which is why, 10 years ago, nobody was talking about emotional intelligence.
Mm.
I know Daniel's book is already way before that, but it
Mm.
was like a catchword. Now, everything that you read on Harvard Business Review or
Mm.
all these articles, all about, emotional intelligence. So at least
Yeah,
there is a momentum. Sorry, I'm
that's
actually
right.
having placed in a very thing because I decided to rearrange my living room, of course, during this Corona time, which is the worst
Mm.
time because I couldn't get any furniture, so I have to makeshift. Anyway, but I think that a lot of organizations are doing that now. But I think that definitely more can be done and more should be done. So training courses, all kinds of things, honestly.
Yeah, because I feel like there's so much emphasis on the individual starting to do so much
Mhm.
training, but there gets to a point where there's not really training for managers. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
skill, but they could be a manager for, let's say, 30, 40 years, but they've had no active training to
it's
actually
true.
do that in
It's
particular.
true.
And when I was observing as someone who is a millennial, I was like,
Yes.
well, I'm doing all this training to get the job and
Yes.
like I'm doing training on the job, but there's no actual training on the other side. When when you are writing this book and you were listening to these millennials and you were
Yeah.
listening to everything that we're saying and you obviously have this experience of people who are managing people, where do you think it's going to go with changes in the way of working, changes in, for instance, you were saying how people like to have face-to-face contact, but obviously in this environment, there's not that much face-to-face content as there has been, obviously, for the last 3 months. Where do you
Yeah.
think it's going with the balance between like working from home or remote working and actual that face-to-face
You know,
contact?
I think this last 3 months actually has been so really something that's really wow for the workplace in many ways. I can only say from my experience now, it is. I think it's unfortunate. What, of course, what has happened is crazy. But actually, in terms of the future organization, a lot of organizations and companies now have realized that they do not need to be physically present in an office. They can save costs from being at home. They can actually connect in every single way. Again, in where I work, we had never done remote working ever.
Mm,
I had tried to introduce this policy since years, and it was a no-go. Like, working from home, how can we trust our employees that they're actually working? There
yeah,
was
yeah.
all of this, way of thinking. But now that we've done that for 3 months and they see that, oh my God, everybody's still working and everything's still running smoothly, I think this will change tremendously.
Mm,
And that is going to be able to allow us to connect even more, I think, with millennial generations, because now I understand them more.
mm.
When they want to work from home, or flexi time, more work life balance. I think everybody has seen the advantages of this now over the last month. So I think in that sense, it's much better for connecting, and it will help us balance much more.
Yeah, going forward. I think interesting for me was like I have had jobs where I work from home and I've had jobs where I've
Mhm.
gone into the office, but I found myself at times actually missing the separation, which was
Mhm.
very interesting for me because I
Yeah,
thought working from home would be great. I have in the past for previous
yeah,
jobs, but not for this particular job.
yeah.
But then I found myself, I'm like, I need that separation or I need that face-to-face contact because you get a lot more through, I think, sometimes when it is face-to-face rather than just online.
Oh, you're totally right. And by the way, we will never be able to, in my opinion, you can never ever replace the face to face.
Mm,
I think face to face, we can all go virtual, but sometimes you just need to have a chat with that person. You need to be somewhere, maybe just having a coffee somewhere, or even in the office, anything. And I think that over a screen you can get the job done, but to establish these kind of relations,
Mm.
these good relations that you have with colleagues or with other people, it's not something you can maintain them now. You can maintain them over these virtual communication tools, but I think to create new contacts, I feel like you really need this face to face. And so I mean, yeah, I think it's still a very important part of the workplace. And yeah, but it's good to know that we can balance on both virtual and this. And
Yeah.
hopefully now moving forward, we'll have the maybe more option to be able to do both.
When you were writing the book, when you were analyzing, for instance, organizations or managers who are managing effectively, which organizations do you think are, or which industries, let's go, which industries do you think manage their workforce better than others? Because you obviously, you said that you work in the public sector. Do you
Yeah.
feel like the public sector, because I've obviously have experience working in the public sector as well, and it is quite archaic in some of the things they do just by
Yeah.
the nature of it, just because, there's systems that have been there and there's a lot of people. Which industries do you feel like treat their millennials better in the sense of, those principles that you talk about in the book better than others?
I think, I mean, I don't want it to sound cliche or something, but I do think that those big companies like the Googles, the Twitters, the LinkedIn, those, I think they really know how to do it well, because they really understand, and actually they're catered for this kind of generation. So I think they do this very well, but also it doesn't have to be to that extent. A lot of just even I think definitely more private sector focused. In terms of industries per se, honestly, I cannot tell exactly because I haven't studied all industries.
Okay.
But I can definitely say that in the private sector, they're much more open to. I mean, I know people here who work at GE, who work at all of these companies where they all have this work-life balance, this American mentality, which is really like it's all about producing and it's all
Mm,
about meeting deadlines, but it's you can do it at your own time,
mm,
and I think this is something that most, like in the public sector, you don't have that. It's all about
yeah.
time.
Mm,
Whereas there, it's all about efficiency and about delivering.
yeah.
So I think this is a very big thing. But I think the startups, they do it right because they don't focus on these structures. And you will see so many startups, of course, are started now by millennials. And I mean, this
Mm,
is a normal way of life now. And I think that they do it probably very well.
mm.
Um, I think it's the traditional industries that are still a bit behind. They lag a little bit. Like all these international development institutions, I also work in one, as we said, public sector. I
Mm,
think these have a very, like, they have a lot of work to do to
mm.
get there.
Yeah, but it's like an institutionalized thing, isn't it? It's something that
Yeah.
will take years and years, like
Oh, yeah.
in any government or public sector organization that you work for, regardless of
Exactly.
where it is or which country it is. I mean,
Exactly.
it takes years and years. I mean, you just have
Exactly.
to look at any kind of project that gets delayed.
Mhm.
Um,
But in the UK, they're so advanced actually. In the UK, I think they're very advanced with like work-life balance and things like that
I
because
think, I
they really
think,
are.
yeah. What do you
No?
think? You think in compared to other countries? So I don't have any experience of other countries.
I
So
do, yeah, compared to other countries, because I mean, I have, because when I studied HR, I studied in London, and then ever
yeah.
since, and so all my friends now are all over, and I can see like in the different countries where they work, and I know that my friends in London and generally in the UK, they're much more advanced when it comes to like work life, flexi time, remote
Mm.
working. I think this it's a different ball game than in the rest of Europe.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you see that going then in the rest of Europe? Do you think they just have to catch up to that? Is there like a system thing or is it like an infrastructure when it comes to technology?
Honestly, I think the technology is there. It's just about it's really a mentality and embracing it, and I think that some places, some companies are just not ready for that,
Okay.
or maybe they just don't want to change. But I do think it's just a matter. It's actually just a matter of time, and maybe what we've witnessed now over the last 3 months will be more of a. It will encourage people to move into this kind of directions.
I I mean,
But
I've read case studies the last couple of months of companies that have refused to go digitally, and they've
oh
basically
really?
suffered for that.
Yeah.
Like you've had people or leaders that have refused to update their systems, or they've been refusing for 10 to 15 years,
But
and then
that
it
for
comes
stuff
to,
I don't understand. I don't understand because it's like you're kind of you, why?
yeah, you're kind
Like
of
why
just
don't you want to
shooting
change at the
yourself in the
time?
foot. Yeah.
Like
It's just part and parcel of it. You've got to update the
yeah.
system. Do you think if we're going to just flip on its head a bit, do you feel like you do have some millennials, and I've come across them, you know, in my interview processes and just general life, that we are called somewhat the entitled generation, but I have definitely come across some people who are entitled. How do people or managers go about those kind of people? Do they just have to say to them honestly, like, look, you are new, there is a level of experience that is required? How do they go about that, if we're going to say from a manager's perspective, to someone who does come in thinking he is Mark Zuckerberg, you know, that kind of stereotype?
Yeah. You know, at the end of the day, it's all about expectations. So I think when you come in, you have a certain expectation, right? And entitled or not, you know, if you come in thinking, well, I'm going to change, I'm going to do everything, I think your manager is the one who has to, in a nice way, which is filled with emotional intelligence,
Mm,
explain to you and really just kind of make you understand that how this organization works. It doesn't have to be, you know, again, it can be said in a way that is very encouraging actually
mm,
to the millennial. It really depends again how it's delivered, how it's said. But yes, they do need to tell them. And I think that is the problem, because a lot of people don't like to have difficult conversations.
yeah,
You
that's
know,
yeah.
that's really, that's what I've noticed is, if
Mm,
everybody's happy to talk when somebody's doing well, but when somebody's not doing well or not meeting expectations, they're like, I'll discuss it later in the evaluation process at the end of the year. So
mm,
you spend 8 months with on your to-do list, oh, must discuss this with this person at the end of the month. That's not right. You know, things have to be said, and they should be
mm,
said straight away when they happen, at least a couple days, because that's the only way to have this kind of, you know, continuous dialogue, with and really establish the trust. So yes, I think the manager, it's their main responsibility to tell that person. And yes, we've all seen this kind of entitled
yeah.
behavior, and actually sometimes it's really annoying. I have to say, it's like it can be really annoying, it can be really frustrating. But I think, you know, so what? I'm sure we all, I mean, we all have our different kinds of behaviors, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
But I think the only thing you have to do is just explain to them, this is what you will expect. This is how it's going to go down. This is how your development, your career development, is going to progress over the next course of the whatever next year. And I think as long as they have all the facts and the information, I really think that it would be it could create a very encouraging and supportive environment.
Definitely. Uh, on that point of recruiting,
Mhm.
I've always had this thought, and I've always been battling these thought is, which one's more important? Is it the hiring side, or is it like the firing side? Because I've always kind of I'm of the mindset where it's more important on the firing side, because you know, you don't really know someone until they're in the office, until they're going about their day to day. Like the interview process in my mind, it's a bit like, yeah, I mean, you can ask them these questions, the competency questions, but you don't actually see them in practice, meeting the deadlines and all that kind of stuff. So I put an onus on, you know, if someone's not fitting in, they can kind of go. What's your perspective on that? Do you think it's a mix, or do you think there should be more on, if someone's not performing straight away, they kind of need to have that evaluation straight away?
Honestly, I think that you know, firing in our industries is not one that we do a lot of actually, because it's more of a, you know, stay in our organization for a long time. But recently, we are actually becoming a bit more, you know, let's say efficient when it comes to these things. And to be honest, I think, okay, when somebody is not performing, okay, it's not like you fire them straight away. This is something I'm totally
Mm,
against, because you
mm,
have to understand, you know, this is where again your manager needs to understand why you're not performing. You know, is it something personal, is it something professional, is it something that we can help you with? Because when somebody's not performing, you can, and they don't know how to do their job, for example, then maybe you can offer some kind of you know, training, or help them
mm,
if you feel that they have potential. If it's something personal, maybe you can also try to, you know, adapt, or you know, if they have issues, maybe you can help out in some ways. At the end of the day, we're all humans, so there
mm,
has to be this kind of empathy around, right?
mm,
And if somebody just really just doesn't want their job or doesn't like their job, okay, then that's a whole different thing, because then they really should leave. But I think you should really give somebody the benefit of the doubt. So you would have this conversation. Ideally, I think you would have this conversation. Then maybe you would give it another like 3 months where you would monitor progress. You would really have proper deadlines in place of what you expect to be done, if they're
Mm,
met, if they're not met, why. And that's what you do maybe for 3 to 6 months. I
mm,
think that's quite fair. But I mean, less than 6 months, you cannot take action, I don't believe, and fire
mm.
somebody, because if they're going through like some traumatic phase in their life, you can't really just fire them without understanding
Yeah,
the
it's a
reason.
bit that's a bit unfair, isn't it?
That would be really unfair. I
That's
mean,
unfair.
so I think you need to allow people to really you need to understand first what's the problem, and then you have to see
Mm,
if you can fix it.
yeah. In the book, you touched upon the fact that we as a generation want to change jobs. I mean, when I started, we were encouraged to change job every 2 to 3 years.
Hmm.
And you were just saying in the public sector, a lot of the people, and I came across a lot of people who had
Hmm.
been in the same, not even the same job, but the same
Role probably.
role for like over 40 years.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, and I'm like, wow, I'm working with people. I remember working at one organization where the
Hmm.
average age was like way into its 40s. And
Hmm.
like I was one of the younger ones out of everyone. And where I mean, we are encouraged to change jobs every 2 to 3 years.
Hmm.
That's in my mind, that's where that's where it's going, because that sharing of information is really important.
Hmm.
Do you feel like there's still some companies who look down upon that and they want you to stay longer, or do you think some are just encouraging people to go on
I
and
do
get
believe that
experience?
I do believe that in some companies they still look at CVs and they think, "Ooh, every 2 years, every
Mm,
3 years, that's a flight risk." Like, you know, so some companies really do that. I see that, honestly. I see that quite a lot.
mm,
So I see a lot of people looking at CVs and like, oh, somebody who hasn't held a job for more than 3 years in one place is not somebody we want to invest in or bring in. It is true that this is becoming definitely not, maybe not the norm. And I think moving along, I assume 3 to 5 years is probably going to be the average time. The thing is, I think like changing jobs every 2 years, again, it's a mentality thing. I'm not used to it either. I've never had
mm.
that. And when I look at CVs sometimes too, I wonder, okay, 2 years here, 2 years here. But as somebody who's been in an organization for a long time, I can say sometimes I've only learned things after 4 or 5 years.
Mm.
So it's not like after 2 years the learning curve ends. So this doesn't, it hardly ever happens. So if somebody cannot learn anything still after 2 years, I would be surprised. If they're leaving for other opportunities, that's fine. But if they say they're leaving because that's it, they couldn't learn anything anymore, this I would question it, because
Mm.
I believe that in every job you can still, if you have exhausted your own role, then you can still take on other things. You can do things differently. You can innovate in many ways. So I think there's always a way to make that role more interesting in
Yeah,
some
yeah.
way.
Yeah, than someone just sort of going just because they feel like they've
Yeah, like exactly,
completed
like
that
every
job.
2 years, like I'm done.
Yeah. On to the next one. Um, when you were writing this book, if we're
Yeah,
going to go take the writer's hat,
yeah.
this being your first book, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
The challenges, I mean, there's always so many challenges, honestly.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was really trying to strike a balance between a book that is light to read, but one that has all the information in there. So, I mean, leadership books in general in the past have been really very text heavy,
Mm,
and very word heavy. And I really, I read them because it's good. You need to read these leadership books.
yeah.
But I have to say, I didn't so often enjoy reading them because I thought at some point that they lost me because it was all theory and theory and theory. And I love theory. I mean, I love theory. But I also think, like in the workplace, this day and age, we need practice. So that's one of the flaws that I had in so many of the books that I read. So for me, the challenge of writing this book was really to kind of make it interesting and light to read,
Mm,
where you could just like pocketbook, like read it maybe in just a couple of days or something, but also to make it like informative and something that you can take away from, like when you do the
yeah.
self-assessment test or
Yeah.
something. It just makes you think a little bit about your traits. I don't know if people actually did the self-assessment test, but it makes you think about yourself,
Yeah.
and I think that is interesting because at the end of the day we really need to evaluate how we are as well as people, as managers, as leaders.
Mm.
So that was really the balance, is striking that.
I think that's really important as well. Just to
Mhm.
touch on upon like a lot of the people who follow me and follow my
Yeah.
channel is they always ask me, they're like, how do I get the most out of a book? And I
Mhm.
always think that I like the way at the end of you had that self-assessment where you can like write
Mhm.
down your flaws, your weaknesses, things that you want to work on, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. I like books that are interactive
Mhm.
because sometimes, like you say, especially in this space, the leadership space, they get really dry.
Yeah.
And there's also many models and theories you can talk about before you kind of think, well, what is it in practice? What are some of your favorite leadership books?
Ooh, actually, I have so many leadership books actually, but I actually now like the more lighter ones. Like I love everything. I like from Robin Sharma. I like,
Yeah.
his style, his books. I also like, like the Simon Sinek books,
Mm.
to a certain extent.
Yeah.
You know what?
It's funny you say that because my brother, he, as a family with the channel and stuff,
Yeah,
we're all starting to read more and everything, and
yeah.
he's like, can you give me some sort of introductory book? And I gave him Start With Why. And he goes, we basically make a joke of it now as saying like everything, like how he's in. He's like, yeah, I'm really good because I started with why kind of thing. But he was like, why does he say start with why all the time in that book?
I
And I'm
know.
like, and like people in the reviewer space look down upon that book because they think like it's
Mm,
too simplistic, and
yeah.
I empathize with that, but it's
Mm,
he obviously was trying to cater to a larger market, and it's
yeah.
when you do read it, you kind of feel like it's a bit
You know,
simplistic in a way. But
I have to say, like his YouTube, I mean, I think, I don't know if it was a TED talk or whatever, but the one that he did where he was basically saying how millennials are so entitled and the parenting and all of that, and I have to, I showed it to a lot of people, like millennials, they couldn't stand him.
mhm.
None of them could stand him actually. They were like, what, he's also the way that he delivers, and I have to say, after that, I really look at him differently because the way that he was saying, it was so arrogant also. So anyway, let's put that aside. But one book that I love actually is
Yeah.
Phil Jackson. Is the basketball coach of the Chicago Bulls. He has this book called 11 Rings, and
Okay.
and that's amazing. I used to love basketball, so I was totally into that style. And his book is actually not a traditional leadership book, but it's a really good leadership book because he talks about bringing in all of these crazy personalities at the time.
Mhm.
Like these 90s basketball stars, Michael Jordan, like all of them, and they all have crazy, egos and personalities, and how he made them work together. And I think this is such a good book for teamwork and leadership. So I kind of like these books a lot. Much more than some of the ones that I think people are always raving about. I don't know. Like I like this. I also like a lot of the Richard Branson books. I like Richard
Okay.
Branson. I like his books too.
So you like the practical people who have kind of gone through it and they talk about it as opposed to people who talk about the theory side of it.
I do, yeah, I do. That's because, also because as somebody who also has a doctorate, so I understand like the PhD part, which is all about the theories and the
Yeah,
theories. I,
yeah.
I, I love the theory part, but then I also, that's one thing. But when you work in a workplace, you need to also have the practice. Otherwise, the theory is not gonna, it's not gonna cut it.
Yeah, exactly. You need that learn from experience, the people who've
Hmm.
gone through it, obviously, because
Exactly.
you can read as much theory as you want, but if you don't actually learn from people who put it
Hmm.
into practice, then it's a bit like you kind of just
Exactly.
overwhelmed with theory. You're like, what am I going to do with all this theory? Because like I
Huh.
always talk to people, like you have to find ways to implement the things that you read, but
Mhm.
if you've got 85 theories you need to do, you're like, how do I actually practically implement that?
Yeah.
Because that's why I love like the book, I don't know if you've read it, like Atomic Habits by James
Oh,
Clear.
that's actually on my list now. I just bought it, so
Yeah, like that's why I love that book, because you have like The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, which
yes.
talks about the scientific aspects of habit
Okay.
formation. But after that, you're like, well, how do I do it? Like,
Okay.
oh, but then
That's interesting. Okay, good.
Atomic Habits develops it, and they kind of talks about how you can implement it into your life. And
Um,
he talks about how the power of habit helped him write that book. And
hmm,
it's
that's
really,
interesting.
it's really interesting. You
You
should
see.
definitely read it. You should
Okay,
definitely read
cool.
it.
One book, by the way, that I really got into right now, I mean, is Mark Manson. Is his
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The first one or the second one?
Actually, I like the first one more.
Yeah,
Not the one about hope. The second one, I like
yeah,
the,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. I thought that was really interesting, and I like his. I think the second one is a bit repetition of the first,
yeah.
actually. But
I, it's something that happens though when you I think when you write a
yeah,
book that is as popular as the first one, you're kind of
yeah,
almost entitled to kind of remain in that same space because you know you want to sell
totally.
it, don't you? So
Yeah.
but yeah, that's it's I like the honesty. I think
Hmm.
sometimes I feel sometimes when you read an author, there's some sort of gravitas to it where they're trying to impress you.
Yeah,
It's nice sometimes us to read something that's a bit more raw
that's
and
so true.
honest.
That's
It's
true.
really important.
Hmm.
Have you kind of got the bug with writing? Is there something in the future? Like, what's
Yeah,
your thinking now?
I'm really excited actually now because now I'm thinking like now I want to focus on the generation after the millennials. So I want to
Yeah,
really
yeah.
focus now on Gen Y. So I was doing some reading actually about that, and also thinking about the future workplace and how I can kind of how to create a future workplace which is really again based on that demographic, which that's going to be the new demographic. So I was really thinking about how to move this project forward. So this is just something I got an idea like in the last weeks.
Go
So
onto
yeah.
TikTok and see what they're doing.
Yeah, but I find it really interesting. Plus, I'm
Yeah,
so
yeah.
into this whole generational differences and cultural differences. I love that. So
The
I
cultural
find it very
differences is really like
yeah,
something that really interests me as well, is
yeah.
to find out how other cultures manage
Hmm.
not only their relationships from a family perspective, because obviously everything starts from the
Yeah,
family. Like you
yeah.
can't analyze a society without looking at about how each individual
Hmm.
culture in like sees society, sees the family and how important that is. I mean, you look at a country like Japan who puts so much respect on
Of
the
course.
family, and then you look at how they handle people in the workplace. I mean, there's
Hmm.
no doubt that that is linked.
Exactly. It all translates, actually. It's true.
Definitely. Which countries do you find, if on that aspect, which countries do you find manages the workplace better than others? I
Mm,
don't know how much experience you have. I know that you were originally from Lebanon, is that correct?
yes. Yeah, that is correct.
Um, h- how do you think different cultures manage the workplace differently? And
I mean, I think Lebanon is a mess, but I can say in terms of the working environment, as you actually just rightly said, because their attitude is more relaxed and they're more like, oh, let's do this tomorrow, and
yeah,
they're very Mediterranean, and this Mediterranean translates so much into the way that they do business, which is. Let's just take it easy. If it doesn't work today, it'll work tomorrow. It's actually a bit unreliable, and it's a very stark contrast to Austria, where I
mm,
live, because in Austria, this Germanic culture, which is all about, everything is
yeah,
like
yeah.
on time, everything is right, everything is deadline. So it's really interesting for me always to see how both of these, countries operate. Um, but I think that I mean, of course, American companies, they're all about money. They're about making money. They're about the bottom line. They are, I think, very advanced in the way they treat their employees as well. But I still think that the UK actually does that well too. So I think
I
the
think
UK is quite advanced as well
yeah. I
in
mean,
terms
from
of, you
observing
know,
it from
their
my
how they deal with the workforce
yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah, from observing it, obviously you've studied it at depth, so you would have seen from each individual country that does it. But like for me, someone has to study, I feel like the UK has an upper hand in the fact that it is so multicultural because it is a mixing pot of different
Yeah,
cultures that you almost have to adapt and have to create this environment where it's so inclusive and it so allows for everyone.
it's
On the
true.
American front, do you think it's interesting the fact that you say that they are quite open to the workforce and stuff, but they still do have like workers' rights where you can like fire people and they don't have that much holiday as general compared to other countries. Do you
Yeah.
think it's just the big companies that are really good and everyone's just so far behind them?
I think so, and also because to be honest, my experience has been mainly in international development in these companies. So it's more like World Bank, IMF, IFC. So and these, of course, are very advanced. So I would say these are really like probably the top of how they treat people and
Yeah,
how and what they offer. And they definitely don't have the 10 days, working holidays a year. And no,
yeah,
they're
it's
very
crazy.
advanced. But yeah, of course, other companies and whatever. I think small to mid-sized, they probably are completely different. So and you know, it's just way too generalization. This is really like, I'm generalizing a lot right now, but you know, for example, companies like huge companies like GE or whatever, they were doing remote working already since 20 years.
Yeah.
So you know, it's like, it's just a different way, I think. But I definitely think the big companies are probably ahead of the game.
Ahead of the curve, yeah. I think they have
Yeah,
to be though, because they're trying to
yeah,
attract the top talent. That's the thing.
exactly,
Is when you're trying to
exactly.
attract the top talent all the time,
Yeah,
you have to be on it with not
yeah,
only your technological infrastructure, but you have to be on the openness to everyone. Because if you're an
yeah.
international company, you have to be open to everyone, regardless of their background. So,
Oh, totally, totally.
yeah, I mean, my experience from working for the public sector, although it was a public sector, I feel like they were very inclusive to
Mhm.
everyone who came in there, and that's really important.
Yeah,
How
totally.
are you going to go about studying the Gen Y? Because like for me, like I look at my cousins, for instance, who are younger
Yeah.
than me, and I don't get the world that they live in, and they're not even that much younger than I am, and I'm like, how am I going to go about not only establishing an effective relationship with them, but like if,
Mhm.
for instance, in the future I have to manage them, how am I going to go about them? Because their world changes on a daily
Oh yeah,
basis.
oh yeah. I think, you know, whatever the millennials are right now, the Gen Y is gonna be like double, in a
Yeah,
way, more complex. You know, like if you guys are digital natives, they are the digital natives. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and also they are, like, when I was reading about them now, they are the diverse. They're the most like diverse generation that we're gonna have, and they believe in diversity, and they believe in impact, and they believe in meaningful things and purpose. So I don't know how I'm going to go about actually, because, you know, also the age groups, I think they're from 8 to 20 now or something like that. So, I mean, I'm not going to ask an 8-year-old what what he believes, but
I
I was
don't know. They
thinking
might say something impactful.
maybe, but I was thinking, you know, data protection. I don't think I can talk to 8-year-olds
No,
like this.
I don't think
So
so.
I was thinking maybe just to kind of question like the 18 to 20-year-olds, or I don't know yet exactly how. But I think it's really about the characteristics. It's not so much about the workplace. It's more about finding out their characteristics and
Mm.
how they function. And when you find out how they function, then you can actually accommodate them in the workplace, because then you can change policies or whatever to accommodate them.
Yeah,
So
that might be quite interesting actually to have a look at them pre-workplace, see what the
mhm,
characteristics are, see what experience they went through, and see how that changed them. Because
exactly,
then you can instead of focusing in the workplace, you can maybe focus in school. Because I don't
exactly.
think I don't think enough's done in school to get you ready for the workplace.
Oh, that's true. That's for sure.
Like I think, for instance, there needs to be a big overhaul in getting people and kids ready, not only from university, but obviously from school to get them ready for the workplace, because not everyone goes to university,
Yeah, yeah,
and getting those skills there and ready. Um, we've probably got another sort of just under 10 minutes, but
yeah.
I wanna talk more about the the leaders who you look up to. In you reference Richard Branson, you mentioned Phil Jackson as people who obviously the books that you've liked,
Yeah.
and leaders that you look up to. What are the characteristics specifically that you think make someone have the most impact as a leader? Maybe not someone who, for instance, is the best with the emotional intelligence, but the one that actually has the most impact on an organization or.
You know, I'm really a big fan of like more humble leaders, like people who are not so full of themselves and know that they're good, but people who really take a step back and kind of push others. I mean, they might, like, they push others to do better and to lead and to kind of they stay in the background and they push others in the foreground because they want to support and develop their people.
Mm,
And I think, but they still have an overview of everything that's happening, and they are still the ones in charge,
yeah.
but they, you know, it doesn't show and it's not so obvious. And I think that is a really good way of leading, because, you know, you get the job done really well, plus you create so much trust with the people around you, because, you know, you're not doing anything for the glory or for being the best, but you're really doing something because you're supporting people and you're
Mm.
believing in others. And I think this is the best way to lead. So really, like, more of a humble leadership. And actually, there's so many books right now, I think, on servant leadership and things like that.
Mm.
So and that's really, I think, the style that I personally like.
Yeah, I mean,
With humor, you know, like humble with humor, somebody who doesn't take themselves too seriously, who has no problem when they don't know something to ask for help. Like, you're
Mm,
not, just because you manage doesn't mean you know everything. No, like
mm,
many times I've seen people, like even my boss's boss, be like, oh, can you help me out with this? Because I'm not sure I understand this. I mean, I think that's great. It's not a sign of weakness at all. I think it's a sign of strength when you ask for help from other people. Unfortunately, it's not seen like that in many places. It's always like, to be a great leader, you have to be aggressive, you have to be strong, you have to show who's the boss. Yeah, I think that is very old school. And I think that the newer way of leading,
mm.
especially for people like millennials and probably Gen Y later, is this kind of leadership. You're there, but you're in the background, but you're giving other people the opportunity
Mm.
to
I
shine.
think, yeah, I think that vulnerability is really important to build
Yeah.
trust. I think in the book you talked about how showing your weakness is not actually a weakness in itself; it's a strength.
Yes.
And I think that's really important because I
Mhm.
think when you go into an organization, you don't want the leader to be like, I'm the leader, I'm at the top, I know
Exactly.
everything. Because if for instance, I've had the experience, you go into a meeting and they're like, do you know what? I don't actually know this, but I know he knows that. And then they explain it, or they know
Exactly.
it better than I do. I'll
Yeah.
let them explain it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because it's like
Yeah.
you're acknowledging not only the fact that you don't know anything, or the fact that you're allowing that person the ability or knowledge that they actually know a lot. So it builds that
Yeah.
confidence within them, which I think is really important.
Totally. I've been in meetings before where, for example, I was there with my boss, and like she would turn to me and say, "Oh, why doesn't Rani explain this? She knows this better than I do." And I think it's something that's said so meaning. It doesn't really take much to say something like this, but actually it makes the person feel so like, okay, I do know this, and she has confidence in me, and she's supportive of me, and I think that's really good. And although I know that she knows everything
Yeah, yeah,
anyway, but
yeah,
it's a way of like making other people shine. And I think as
yeah,
a
yeah.
leader, by the way, one of the most important things as a leader is to make others shine.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I think
So
I think that's really important, especially people starting out, or even people
yeah,
down the road.
exactly,
If they have the knowledge, I think you need to acknowledge that they have the knowledge
exactly.
instead of sort of playing that one down.
Hmm.
Um, on the leadership, I mean, my brother and I talk about this. Is
Hmm.
you talked about like the humble leaders, and I always kind of think about like the biggest business person in the moment is Jeff Bezos, but you
Hmm.
never hear anything about Jeff Bezos.
Totally.
It's one of those things where he's just running it, and he's running it well, and he probably has amazing people around him, but there's
Yeah.
there's no like bells and whistles. He's not like Elon Musk tweeting about
Exactly.
everything
Exactly.
and anything.
Exactly.
And I
I
I
mean,
think
that's so true. Yes. I mean, and he runs like probably it's a billions of dollar company,
I think it's in
and
the trillions now, isn't it?
oh my God, yeah. Apparently, like they had to recruit I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people during this time now, just to keep up with the demand.
I know. It's crazy.
Crazy, but yeah. So this is the kind of leadership that I think is really important, and these are kind of people I would love to work for actually, because I think that you could learn so much than somebody who's all like puffed up and me.
Yeah. I think I
So
think those people kind of get found out after a while though, don't they?
yeah,
They
yeah.
they definitely get found out. Anyway, this has been great. Thank you
Oh,
so
it's
much
been
for
so
your
nice.
time. Thank you so much for explaining the book, everyone. The book is The Chameleon Leader, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. And
Thank you.
do you have any sort of closing words for anyone who wants to know more, not only about the book, but also about perhaps becoming a better manager or leader?
Well, the first thing I would say is please do the self-assessment because I think it is really interesting because even when I did it, by the way, there's a lot of things actually that I learned about myself. So I think it's a good thing to reflect and to think about your strengths and weaknesses anyway. So I would do that, and I'm always happy if anybody would reach out and tell me what their thoughts are.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I know you've got some good feedback on the Bookstagram world, so that's great. And I look forward to reading that next book, the Gen Y
I
books.
hope so. I'll
I'll
keep you
probably
updated.
need it.
We all will.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for this great interview and this chat. And yeah, I hope we will speak soon again.
yeah, definitely. Thanks very much for your
Okay.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks. Bye. Bye
Bye.
bye.